On today's episode of Locked On Oilers, after a tough loss in Seattle, whose stock rose and whose stock dropped in the preseason and at training camp, plus who will be the next training camp casualties for the Edmonton Oilers. All that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to the Locked On Oilers podcast. I'm your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. As mentioned on today's episode, the Edmonton Oilers were in Seattle last night. We will go over the preseason matchup there as the Edmonton Oilers didn't really have a fantastic time on the score sheet, but a lot of positives out of that game. We will talk about that in a minute. Plus, out of that game, whose stock rose and whose stock dropped. We will talk about that a little later on in today's episode. And to wrap it up, who will be the next cuts for the Edmonton Oilers, as today they did announce 2 cuts from the roster, but who will be following suit later on this week. We will talk about that and so much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcasts. Where we are going to start off today, as mentioned, as the Edmonton Oilers did lose last night in Seattle, 2-3-0 score. Seattle did ice a relatively, maybe not their NHL roster, but a lot of NHLers were on that roster for Seattle, including, I do want to mention, former Edmonton Oiler, of course, Justin Schultz. The lineup in Seattle last night for the Edmonton Oilers. The first line kind of sets the tone for the Oilers. Matthias Janmark started alongside Devon Shore and Derek Ryan. The second line of Tyler Benson, James Hamblin, and the homecoming of Kyler Yamamoto, a guy who played in Spokane, Washington, able to play in Seattle last night. Speaking of homecomings, Reid Schaefer was on the third line for the Edmonton Oilers last night alongside Greg McKegg and Jake Virtanen. Luke Esposito, who we will talk about a little later on today, had a fantastic game as well. He started on the fourth line with Noah Philp and Seth Griffith. On defense, Philip Broberg was along with Tyson Barrie. Marcus Niemelainen was alongside a guy who has really made a name for himself in the Edmonton camp in Maximus Wanner, another guy we will talk about a little later. Alex Peters, a guy who really has turned some heads in the Edmonton Oilers camp, started alongside Michael Kesselring, another guy we will talk about a little later on. As well, Olivier Rodrigue and Ryan Fanti split the time in Seattle, and that's where we are going to start. As mentioned, it was a 3-0 loss for the Edmonton Oilers, and it started off in the second period with a Matty Beniers goal, an absolute snipe from the second overall pick from last year's draft, well, the 2021 NHL draft. Now, Olivier Rodrigue has been in the Oilers organization for a while, not really probably projected to be anything over an AHL backup. He's been given a lot of time. He looked all right last night, but really Ryan Fanti has come in, and yes, he gave up a tough wraparound goal, and I mean, realistically, he didn't really have a chance on the one-timer 2-on-1 in the third period scored by Morgan Geekie. Ryan Fanti has come in and taken that spot away from Olivier Rodrigue, to the benefit of the Edmonton Oilers and the organization. But Olivier Rodrigue, it seemed like he was brought in seemingly as a favor almost to the Oilers' goaltending coach. and it hasn't worked out. At the time, the Edmonton Oilers had a lot of other goaltenders in the organization, and he's seen some other goaltenders come through the organization. Even take a look at Ilya Konovalov just last year, who, including myself, some people had being a future Edmonton Oiler. Maybe other things, other circumstances affected that decision for him to sever ties with the Edmonton Oilers and move on back to Russia. But still, Olivier Rodrigue has still been that guy. Now, I know I'm kind of going on about a guy who's been an AHL guy, and it seems like maybe a little mundane to talk about here. But it just kind of talks about the state of the Edmonton Oilers goaltending depth. Now, Ryan Fanti came in last night, and again, as mentioned, didn't have a fantastic outing. The stats would say, per se, I guess, and again, that goal against, the first goal against the wraparound from Ryan Donato, a great pass up from Joey Daccord to get the play going and to catch the Edmonton Oilers sleeping. You could go either way on that Ryan Fanti goal or the Ryan Donato goal on Ryan Fanti. I think Ryan Fanti will fight for and might, most likely win. Maybe not most likely, but I think he could win that third goaltending spot for the Edmonton Oilers this year. It's going to be him and Calvin Pickard down in Bakersfield. It's going to depend how those two play. Now, Calvin Pickard is going to have the advantage over Ryan Fanti. He has the experience in the NHL and the AHL. Ryan Fanti has one game under his belt in the AHL. But I've seen a lot of very solid things from Ryan Fanti. The way he tracks the puck, the way he keeps his eyes all over the ice, and the anticipation he has is pretty solid. Yes, he did get caught on the 2-on-1. It is what it is. That's really a 50-50 play. The thing for Ryan Fanti to work on will be his tips, reacting to tips. The redirection plays for Ryan Fanti have not been fantastic. That's where he's been beat a couple of times now from the games that I've seen from him. In fact, the big goal, the final goal, the winning goal against for Minnesota Duluth for Ryan Fanti in his final game in college was a wraparound goal from none other than Carter Savoy. So, Ryan Fanti, I think, is very strong, will be the guy fighting for that third string spot. Olivier Rodrigue, I don't know. Other notable things to bring up from last night, Markus Niemelainen with 5 hits for the Edmonton Oilers last night, 5 of their 19 overall against the Seattle Kraken, 14 penalty minutes for the Oilers as they got into a little bit of penalty trouble near the end of the game, which we will talk about in our next block here, just talking about some of the players who really stood out on the penalty kill. Seattle also getting in a little bit of penalty trouble as well. However, the Edmonton Oilers, they don't really have any of their power play guys in Seattle or so far, other than Tyson Barrie, really. Evan Bouchard in the last game, or in game 1, I should say, haven't had a lot of fantastic opportunities for the power play, but still 13 penalty minutes for Seattle last night as well. They also out-hit the Oilers last night 23-19. Ryan Donato with 5 hits last night for the Seattle Kraken. So, tough 3-0 loss for the Edmonton Oilers on paper, but a lot to really be impressed about. Some stocks have risen, some stocks have gone down. We will talk about whose stocks have gone up and whose stocks have gone down in just a second, but first, I want to tell you about our partners over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for your football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute sources for every sport out there. I'm talking NHL, MLB, NBA. They've got Korean baseball. They've got some soccer sites. They've got MMA, UFC, boxing, and golf. You can find all of the sports right there on BetOnline. Head to betonline.net right now or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Alrighty, somebody ring the Stocks bell. Is that what it's called? Ding, 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 ding. The thing that was at the start of JBL's entrance theme. Shout out JBL. Shout out WWE. I was at the WWE Raw last night at Rogers Place. That was a lot of fun. But anyway, stocks. Who's going up? Who's going down? I am obviously a very qualified person to listen to about your stocks. Psych. But I can talk about the stocks of hockey players at training camp for the Edmonton Oilers, and we are going to talk about after the Seattle Kraken game last night, whose stocks went up, whose stocks went down. This is going to be a little thing we do throughout the preseason at the end of each preseason game. Whose stocks went up, whose stocks went down after each game. Let's start off with a guy whose stock is going up, and I saw one take saying that he wasn't really impressed with this guy here, but everybody else has really thought that this guy has had a very impressive camp. Last night, he was a -1, but who wasn't a minus for the Edmonton Oilers last night? He had 5 hits, as mentioned, and 11 total over the last 2 games. Or the Edmonton Oilers. 2 blocks last night against Seattle and 4 minutes and 2 seconds spent on the penalty kill. If he is going to make the team, that is where he is going to make his bread. And Markus Niemelainen is the lad I am talking about. Now, again, the physical impetus and the physical side is obvious. 5 hits last night, 6 against Winnipeg, 11 in 2 games. That is an aspect that the Edmonton Oilers do not have right now on their roster, and an aspect they haven't really had in a very long time, even probably prime Zach Kassian. And especially something they haven't had on the blue line in a very long time. Markus Niemelainen's stock has risen in the Oilers training camp, especially with the way that Philip Broberg has played. I've seen a lot of mixed bag reviews over Philip Broberg the last couple of weeks, and especially after last night, it seems like Philip Broberg hasn't really impressed a lot of people with his preseason so far. If he's going to make the team this year, guys like Markus Niemelainen and a couple other guys that we'll mention, maybe one of them down the road here, might be breathing down their necks. Might be breathing down Philip Broberg's neck. He might want to be careful, especially with the way Markus Niemelainen is playing. He's got into NHL action the last season, almost has as many NHL games as Philip Broberg right now, and he's bigger and older. Interesting look there for Markus Niemelainen and the Edmonton Oilers. Next, someone's stock who went down after looking at their stat line. Oh, wow. Wow. 1 shot on goal. That's all there is to talk about from Jake Virtanen's game last night. Was going to give him the on-ice benefit of the doubt, but especially against a team of the Seattle Kraken's likes, I guess, and that's not a slight to the Seattle Kraken. They played a relatively young team, but still players with NHL experience and guys who are probably going to be on their NHL club all over the lineup. Yes, it's a back-to-back game. Yes, he had to travel. That's a tough trip. Yes, it's just out to Seattle. But after playing a game late, well, it was an afternoon game, getting on the plane, landing in Seattle, practicing, and then playing. Tough on a body like Virtanen's, who hasn't really played a lot. But for a guy who's fighting for an NHL contract, he still doesn't have a contract, obviously. A lot of other guys are overplaying him and outplaying him, including guys on AHL contracts, including guys who are already within the organization and have some sort of repertoire, or not repertoire, but more of a relationship with people within the organization. That was not a great showing for Jake Virtanen for trying to make the Edmonton Oilers and trying to make an NHL roster in general. That wasn't a great look. Jake Virtanen's stock down after last night in Seattle. A guy whose stock has risen, though, another big defenseman, who's been catching a couple of eyes recently. Jonathan Willis called this prospect a raw, but he saw why the Edmonton Oilers selected him. I have been talking about this guy for a little while now, and I think either him or Philip Kemp will make the team and play for the Edmonton Oilers at some point, if not later on this year. Last night, one hit from the big man, and it was a big one. He's played 4 minutes and 4 seconds on the penalty kill last night for the Edmonton Oilers. 3 shots on goal and a blocked shot. Michael Kesselring, a big lad. I mean, the Edmonton Oilers had him on their prospect sheet at like 6'3", 6'4", or something like that. I had people telling me he's upwards of 6'5", and he looks big. He skates big. You could, every time he's on the ice, you can really tell he is noticeable. And Michael Kesselring, he's going to be one of those guys who isn't necessarily on the bubble this year, might be on the bubble next year, but you could potentially see him get a call up later on this year if the Edmonton Oilers fall into some injury trouble, suspension trouble, this, that, or the other thing. Michael Kesselring might be a guy who has certainly upped his stock, especially after last night, but has really turned some eyes in training camp this year. And finally, the last player whose stock is rising. I mentioned that, Jake Virtanen needs to keep his eye out for guys who aren't even on NHL contracts right now. And this guy last night drew the ire of a lot of people around the game last night. Jack Michaels and Bob Stauffer couldn't stop talking about him. And in fact, I'm pretty sure it was Jack, and excuse me if it wasn't Jack Michaels for putting words in your mouth here, but they mentioned on the broadcast that if Jake Virtanen had the game that Luke Esposito had last night for the Edmonton Oilers, the conversation would be much different around him today and getting a contract. However, it wasn't Jake Virtanen. It was Luke Esposito, a guy who's on an AHL contract right now. A shot on goal, one hit. He was all over the place for the Edmonton Oilers. The other thing as well, 2 minutes, 18 seconds on the penalty kill. I know I mentioned that for all of those guys there, but Jake Virtanen, a guy who, if he is going to make the Edmonton Oilers, he has to kill penalties. But guys like Luke Esposito, you can look throughout the entire lineup. The entire first line for the Edmonton Oilers kill penalties. Kyler Yamamoto kills penalties. Dylan Holloway was out there killing penalties against the Winnipeg Jets. Tyler Benson, if he wants to make the team, he needs to be killing penalties as well. And they are. And a guy like Luke Esposito, who's going out there with a takeaway, forcing plays, and really turning heads within the organization, who he has been within the organization for a year, if not a couple now for sure. Luke Esposito, very impressive showing for him last night. Wouldn't be surprised if he keeps this play up, could get an NHL contract very soon from the Edmonton Oilers. His stock has risen. So 3 stocks have gone up for the Edmonton Oilers after last night. Markus Niemelainen, Michael Kesselring, and Luke Esposito. And 1 stock going down after last night with 1 shot on goal. And that is the only stat to speak of. Jake Virtanen. We are going to move on to whose cuts are going to be next, or who is going to be cut next. The Edmonton Oilers did make a couple of moves after yesterday's game in Seattle. 1 player staying in Seattle, 1 is heading to Moose Jaw. We will talk about those players and who could be joining them next in the next period of today's episode. But first, I just want to thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, make sure you tune in to Locked On NHL, where Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on all things NHL in the hockey world with Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. Alrighty, and moving on to the final period of today's episode, a couple of notes to pass on from the Edmonton Oilers today, as they have sent back Reid, Schaefer to the Seattle Thunderbirds of the WHL, playing his final preseason game in Seattle. Had a very good run with the Oilers this year. The Edmonton Oilers first round draft pick. Old habits die hard, I swear. First round draft pick from this year, the 32nd overall from the first round this year, has been sent back to the Seattle Thunderbirds, a stacked WHL team there. Very exciting team to watch. If they are in Edmonton, I'm not sure if they will be in Edmonton because they are an American team. If they are, definitely a game to go watch. Obviously, Reid, Schaefer in there, Kevin Korchinski from the Chicago Blackhawks as well on that team. Just a lot of very good players there. Reid, Schaefer back to Seattle. Another WHLer on his way back to his junior team is Maximus Wanner, who has made massive leaps and bounds, or massive steps, really, for the Edmonton Oilers and his development. Started off camp next to Darnell Nurse due to the injury of Cody Ceci. Did see his playing time and his partners kind of shift in between camp and as camp went on. Very solid camp for him. A big impression for him. As Bob Stauffer said, wouldn't be surprised to see him get a contract very soon from the Edmonton Oilers. He is heading back to the Moose Jaw Warriors of the WHL, who will be in Edmonton a lot this year. So if you do see, or if you are able to get to any games, make sure you get to the Moose Jaw Warriors, as Maximus Wanner will be a big part in Moose Jaw. So, what's next for the Edmonton Oilers? Cuts will be coming, obviously. They made more cuts today. And the next cut window seems like it is going to be a big one. 1 cut last time with Jake Chason on Monday. 2 cuts on Tuesday with Schaefer and Wanner. Wednesday, I presume, after the Calgary Flames game, I guess maybe even Thursday, will be the next big round of cuts. So who do I think will be in that round of cuts? The first one I think will be, unfortunately to say, maybe not unfortunately to say, because it'd be too soon to send to have him anywhere, but just a guy I didn't think had a fantastic camp, who needed a good camp, but that's Matvei Petrov. I think he'll be one of the next ones to go for the Edmonton Oilers. Again, just wanted a little bit more from him, but just having the familiarity in his first full real camp from the Edmonton Oilers is massive for him. Another big year for him in North Bay. We shall see how that turns out for him. Next, I believe most of the guys or some of the guys on AHL contracts will be the next ones sent back to Bakersfield. I'm not sure when Bakersfield camp begins, but it should be really soon here. Darian Keelb, I believe, will be one of those guys who gets the call back to Bako. Yanni Kaldis as well getting a call back to Bakersfield. Philip Angaris, I think he will get a call too. Hasn't really been in a lot of big leverage situations for the Oilers in camp, hasn't seen too much time really, especially game time, and is played as an extra forward in the scrimmages and in practice and in training camp so far. I think he will be one of the next ones to go. Also, if the training camp for Bakersfield is right around the corner, I think you will see a goaltender leave. Maybe not Ryan Fanti immediately. I think Olivier Rodrigue will be the first one to go, just to get a goaltender down there and get the rest of everybody back there as well. Finally, I'm not too sure what's going to happen with this next guy. Will he go back to juniors? I haven't really heard much. It seems like by most indications, Tyler Tullio will be going to Bakersfield this year. I'm not too sure, to be 100% honest with you, but I think in the next round of cuts, we will find out what the plan is with Tyler Tullio, just getting healthy after a tough injury. After the Penticton tournament, got back skating, I believe. I don't think he got into a game quite yet, but he has, he was, at the scrimmage for the Edmonton Oilers on Saturday. Played decent. I don't mind Tyler Tullio that much, but I do. I like Tyler Tullio, but I'm interested to see where he goes this year. I think he will be in the next round of cuts. As mentioned, the Edmonton Oilers play tomorrow, Wednesday night at 7 p.m. in Calgary, the Battle of Alberta, the first installment of the Battle of Alberta. We shall see who plays down there tomorrow. We will have that on tomorrow's episode as well. Hopefully we can all watch that somewhere, not on YouTube, maybe TV, but probably not. Either way, we shall call it there. I hope you have a wonderful day today. Stay safe. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, and play La Bamba, baby.